Alors là, on est devant le bâtiment qui s'appelle American Immigration Lawyer Association. Donc en fait, c'est le bâtiment des avocats tout simplement, hein, des avocats de l'immigration. Donc c'est une association qui se tient à Washington DC, donc ici. Et aujourd'hui, on va interviewer un ancien avocat dans cette association, donc qui s'occupe de l'arrivée des migrants qui veulent aux États-Unis. Voilà, dans tous les États-Unis, hein, pas seulement à Washington. Donc, c'est une association qui est vraiment très connue ici, dans cette ville et dans tous les États-Unis. Donc voilà, on a eu l'opportunité d'avoir cette interview avec cet ancien avocat retraité. Donc c'est vraiment une chance pour nous. Donc on va l'interviewer maintenant. C'est parti. So, thank you very much to accept that interview. It's very an honor for us to interview you. So, we know you were a lawyer. Can you explain your career, your experience?
I began practicing immigration law in 1978 in San Francisco, and then I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right not long thereafter, and practiced immigration law in Pittsburgh from 1984 or so until I came to AILA on staff in 2005. I've done, when I was in practice, I did immigration asylum cases, I did family cases, I did an awful lot of immigration employment cases, an awful lot of work with physicians, and an awful lot of work with researchers.
Okay.
I was a volunteer. AILA is a membership organization made up of attorneys, and there are various groups of attorneys and committees to identify and resolve different immigration law issues. I was a volunteer with those different committees for probably 15 years before I came to AILA on staff, working with other AILA members on those committees.
So why do you choose to help especially immigrant people?
Immigration law, I started in California at a time when immigration law was very, very important for migrant workers. It remains very important for migrant workers. But migrant workers in California were particularly, had particular hardships. Not only did they have immigration law as a challenge to survival, but they were trying to organize into unions, the United Farm Workers Union, and there was an intersection of labor law, employment law, and the rights of workers to organize with the rights of workers in migration to be able to come freely into the United States or to flow freely back and forth. And to have the labor protections. That's how I got involved in immigration law in the first place, was really working in farm worker communities.
And according to you, what was the most difficult things to deal with in your job?
The most difficult things in practicing immigration have to do with the inherent harshness of the immigration law itself. United States law divides the world into two classes of people: citizens of the United States and everybody else. That's just basic and inherent to the way that United States law views the population of the world. It's translated in immigration law into some very, very strict rules that can be very, very unforgiving. And the only way to resolve that harshness is to be able to convince immigration officials, agency officers, to exercise the ability to exercise discretion not to enforce or to enforce in a less harsh way. the greatest hardships, the greatest difficulty in practicing immigration law is to meet somebody for whom you can't do anything.
Do you think that the immigration policy in the United States is adapted to the current situation?
Well, it depends on what the current situation is. The basic immigration law in the United States has not changed for 30 years, 40 years. Some of it goes back 50 or 60 or 70 years, some of the foundation concepts and principles. U.S. immigration law has not changed to reflect the world changing.
Yeah.
From a very isolated, countries 100 years ago, 75 years ago, 50 years ago, 1952, you had telephones. You may have had just beginning television. You did not have jets. You did not have the internet. You did not have worldwide global exchange. And you did not have a huge population growth to the world that has taken place since America's current foundational immigration law was enacted in 1952. There have been changes in 1965, in 1976, in 1984, in 1986, in 1990, and 1996. But they're all little changes, and some are harsh reactions to circumstances that existed at a particular time with little flexibility. That's the biggest problem that we have. So if your question is, has U.S. immigration law adapted to changing conditions, the answer is no.
Okay.
And that adaptation has needed to be made in 1998, in 2000, in 2005, and up to now.
And do you think people are sufficiently committed to welcoming migrants in the United States, in Washington?
The American people in general have historically and are currently a very welcoming people.
Yeah, it's true.
The political leadership is not so much so, and has an influence on how laws are enacted. So if you may go to somebody who does not support and embrace immigration as a principle, as a concept, but has a friend who is an immigrant from El Salvador, or has a friend who's an immigrant from Nigeria, and will want to do everything he can or she can to help that friend, but still nevertheless support a more restrictive general view. Ultimately, though, and this is where I wanted Mary's help,
see if I can help.
I think that public attitudes towards immigration, public polling, is very, very favorable to immigration as a whole. And as the current administration has taken steps to more harshly enforce immigration, separating families, jailing families who are seeking refuge and asylum, making it more difficult for people to come into the United States through changes in interpretation of existing law, public perception and public opinion is changing more favorably toward an open and embracing immigration system.
Okay, I think it's a very good point, because in Europe and in France, I know there is two different people. There is lots of people which don't really accept the immigrant people, and it's a problem because the nation is separated in two different kind of people, and I think it's a problem. If here in America, in the United States, people are more favorable, I think it's a very good thing for immigration in general.
I agree completely, and unfortunately, many of the attitudes those intensely nationalist attitudes that you see throughout Europe with the political leadership in Italy, the resistance movements in France, the restrictionists, the anti-immigrant, anti-Merkel movements in Germany, and some of the attitudes in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, Brexit. That intense nationalism is also reflected here. And if those attitudes can be changed, to change those attitudes is going to be a challenge. It can be accomplished, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. In Europe, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's why also the news is so important, where people get their news from, and that's what we do. We try to shape stories in the immigration space, so we connect lawyers with journalists and reporters, and so they can share their story and what's really happening on the ground. So people are getting real-time information about what the immigration scene looks like.
How do you see the global evolution of immigration in the future, for example, in 20 years?
You've got to have confidence in the inherent goodness of mankind in order to have any confidence that in a 20-year span, these tremendously backward forces can be driven out. I was thinking the other day broadly how the principles of traditional liberal democracy have been so effectively undermined over the last 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, and just have a hope with an awful lot of work to go with that hope that it can be turned around. But, the work is in getting the truth out. As Mary was saying, the communications channels where people get their news, how people get their information, how just raw data, how information is turned into knowledge, not just, there are so many migrants, but what was driving this particular body of migration and how to incorporate them and how to resolve conditions in sending countries so that people don't need to flee, don't need to move. And when there is migration, that it is not out of fear, but out of ambition, out of hope for greater prosperity, greater success. In a 20-year period, it could be turned around.
Example, but,
it's going to take an awful lot of work. Someday, with that work, the attitudes will be able to be reversed. But it's going to take an awful lot of work.
Yeah.
Really?
And also, the attitudes are also, like Deasy was saying, shaped by the administration. So the public perception might be one way, but then also who's in office has an influence over the way people view immigration based on what the president is saying about immigrants. That really informs people's viewpoint of how they treat migrants and how they look at them. So, who knows who will be in office in 20 years?
Yeah.
Who knows who will be the president? But that has, an impact too. So.
Yeah, really. In Europe, it's the president and the government has a really big impact on what people think and how they act. So, yeah, I agree. Do you think that young people's opinion is taken into account in political decisions in the United States?
Yes. But I think that young people can have even greater influence by participating in the political process. The political process right now is very, very frustrating. And that goes back to the question of work.
Yeah.
At what point do you just give up, say, I can't do it anymore? If young people here, if young people in France, if young people in Italy vote, participate in the political institutions at all levels, from towns, villages, provinces, states, counties, communities, and become active in advocating for their beliefs, then the views of young people will eventually win out. You know, so do the views of young people, are they listened to? When they shout,
Yeah.
when they stand up, yes. I mean, we really need you guys. You know,
Okay.
we old farts can only do so much.
See a lot of I was telling them yesterday about all the different protests that happened throughout DC, and a lot of them are like big groups of young people, especially the March for Our Lives. I don't know if you went to that yet last year. It was like against gun violence.
Okay.
There was a huge contingency of young people who went to that, so it's really empowering to be a young person and be surrounded by other young people.
Yes, definitely.
Situation.
And that's the kind of political action that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we need young people in because I'm young, I say that, but I think it's important to have more experienced people and young people in the same group, political group, for example, because there is two point of view difference. So if you had one advice for young people across the whole world, what would it be?
Take action. Do stuff.
Okay.
Don't be shy. You're the future. You've got to grasp it. You've got to seize it. You've got to control it. You've got to wrest it out of the hands of the old farts who are causing the trouble.
It's a good advice.